Every director has a type of movie that they're known for making. Some make their signature movies poorly, like Michael Bay, and some make them well, like David Fincher. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo joins a long line of Fincher movies that focus on an investigation into a killer. While Zodiac and Seven are refreshing and unique in their own ways, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is unfortunately generic. David Fincher's talent gives the story energy and tension that make it entertaining, but the screenplay itself is not something that intrigued me in the same ways that Zodiac and Seven did. This might be an unusually short review because what I want to say about the story and its characters is limited. The biggest issue I have with this story of the film is that I feel like I've seen it before in other better movies. The structure of the story is stock standard for what it is, which is something that hurts the movie in the last half hour to 20 minutes. If the film had ended half an hour earlier, then I think the fact that it's generic might not have had as much of an impact on how I felt about the movie, but what happens in the last scenes of the film is something that didn't have much connection to a large portion of the rest of it. It connects back to the events that occur in the opening scenes, which is something that had to be done to wrap up the movie without leaving lots of loose ends, but I don't think that it necessitated as much screen time as it got. The other thing I felt was lacking in the story was how information about the investigation was relayed to the audience. Fincher's direction, which I'll talk about soon, revealed pieces of information dramatically, and I enjoyed that aspect of it, but I often found myself confused at the importance of certain details. I found it hard to follow the investigation, and when characters figured out something, I usually would wonder how they figured it out. I'm willing to admit that this comes from a lack of attention on my part, but I would counter by saying that if it's because I wasn't paying attention, then I wasn't paying attention because I just wasn't interested. What saves the movie from what I've just mentioned are its characters and what I'll mention soon, its presentation. Although I think the way that relationships develop in the movie doesn't make much sense, the performances were interesting and entertaining, and individually the character interactions brought a lot of tension to each scene. The stories of Daniel Craig and Rooney Mara's characters made for an interesting first act structure. They don't meet each other for a while into the movie, and the anticipation of how their paths would cross kept me invested in what was happening. I was also engaged with the wider context of the family at the center of the film's investigation. The way each member of the family is introduced is cool, and the way they talk about each other is an interesting way of revealing details about their past as a family and what each of them are like. I feel like at this point in the review, it sounds like I'm repeating myself and making very blanket statements about how I feel, and honestly, it's because I can't really remember one specific thing about the story or its characters to give an example or to flesh out what I'm saying. Everything I've said so far is true. I do think that the characters are interesting, but they're interesting during specific scenes and moments as opposed to interesting in a way that I can remember them post-viewing. I only finished watching about 2 hours ago and it's already fading mostly from my memory. I think this movie might be a case of style over substance as opposed to one where the style is the substance. Fincher's approach to directing makes for tense scenes, and Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score applies incredibly to the different sequences throughout the movie, but there isn't anything to be read in either of these things that makes The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo interesting. Unfortunately, I don't think Fincher's style is anything that I haven't seen from him already in this movie. This means that the movie was entertaining for a first-time watch, and it's something I would recommend most people watch at least once, but it's not something that I'll ever watch again. I'm sorry if you were expecting something more from this review, but as most people will say, the hardest reviews to write are the ones where the movie is mostly forgettable. There's nothing that interesting about the movie that I can decipher or analyze and talk about, and I guess with that being said,
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I mean, it's a hard thing to rate because it's like, it wasn't bad while I was watching it, which means that it's worth, like, there are enough things good when I was watching it that it's worth a 7 out of 10, but the fact that I can't remember any of them kind of brings it down to a 6, so I'm inclined to say 6 or 7, 6.5. I don't know, it's difficult to try and rate this one, but let's just stick with a 6.5.